Well, a very fine morning to you all. Hope you are having a great day so far. I'm meteorologist Max Saparis. Thanks for starting off your morning with a Clean Lakes 101 Science Cafe presentation. Today we're in for some fun. We're going to be talking about love since it is February unfolding, believe it or not. It's Groundhog Day and conflicting reports from our local groundhog versus the national one. So kind of take your pick if you want an early spring or not. But 2 weeks away from Valentine's Day. So I figured it would be a great time to talk about love in the lakes. Yes, that's our topic of conversation today. And we're going to take a look at the relationships between the reproductive cycle of some of our underwater dwellers and the way that some of the fish and plants reproduce is heartwarming, but some are just strange. So very exciting. And I'm glad you're here. I'm Max Saparis. I'm a meteorologist with 27 News. I do the morning show here, and we're proud partners with Clean Lakes Alliance. And you'll see a lot of our talent and our folks that work here out on the lakes, on Lake Minota this weekend for the Frozen Assets Festival. So we're so looking forward to that after a hiatus last year because of the pandemic. So on to our talk, we're going to just be discussing, again, different ways that plants and fish in our waterways are reproducing. And for more on this subject, we will get a presentation soon. But during our presenters' conversation, if you want to weigh in or ask a question, you click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. A window will pop up and you can type your questions there. I'll be then taking those questions, giving them to the folks, our moderators, and they can answer them for us. Now to introduce us to today's speaker is Kyle George from the Johnson Financial Group. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning, Max. Thank you very much. My name is Kyle George, and I'm a financial advisor with Johnson Financial Group. Along with First Weber, Johnson Financial Group is proud to be a presenting sponsor of these talks. Joining us sponsoring Clean Lakes 101 is our usual hosting sponsor, the Edgewater, and supporting sponsor, National Guardian Life Insurance Company. Our production partners are the UW-Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and the UW Extension. And as Max said, we're happy to have WKOW as a media sponsor. Outside of the Science Cafes, Johnson Financial Group is also proud to sponsor a number of other Clean Lakes Alliance events, including Frozen Assets, as Max had said, which is going on now. Be sure to join us all here at the Edgewater this Saturday for the Frozen Assets Festival and the Frozen Assets 5K Run Walk. It's held entirely on frozen Lake Mendota, and the sign-up is still open. Johnson Financial Group also sponsors several other events for Clean Lakes, including the Loop the Lake bike ride in the summer and the Four Lakes golf event in late September. But back to today's talk. Love is in the air. And as Max said, the title of today's presentation is Love in the Lakes. Here to present today's topic is Justin Chenevert from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Justin, originally from Boston, got his start in the field by hauling laundry baskets of invasive weeds from the Charles River. He moved to Wisconsin in 2013 and obtained a master's in water resources management from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He currently works for the DNR in the water monitoring section, but prior to that, Justin worked for Clean Lakes Alliance on a variety of watershed projects. Please join me in welcoming Justin Chenevert to tell us a little more about this very interesting topic. Justin?
Good morning, and thanks so much for that introduction. I will begin sharing the slideshow here and get a quick confirmation that folks can see that. I think we should be all set.
Looks good, Justin.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. So love in the lakes. This is indeed how bluegill reproduce. They kiss once, and then the little bubbles go up to the surface and form new fish. Now, so there are lots of different, basically today we'll be thinking about reproductive strategies of some aquatic organisms. And really it's just a fascinating way to think about evolution and how these species survive in their environment and grow and reproduce. And reproduction is so important for any species. It can be a really, really great lens to think about the species and our interaction with them. So we'll kind of start with some guiding questions that we can return to over the course of the talk here. So we're going to compare how the reproductive strategies of the species are different. You need different strategies, different organisms for different environments. How does a particular strategy help the species succeed? What obstacles to reproduction must the species overcome? And what does this mean for our relationship with the species as humans? We live in the environment too. And then kind of think about, there's this theme of trade-offs for any reproductive strategy where you really can't ever have it all. So we'll come back to that, and I'll point out some trade-offs that are present in some of these strategies. So we'll be talking about northern pike today. The fan favorite, especially in the Madison chain of lakes here. We'll also talk about bluegill, another very popular species and very successful widespread fish. Then we'll move on to something slimier. We're going to talk about leeches a little bit, and then we'll finish it off by talking about zebra mussels, the villain of the day. So let's start right off with pike. All right, so many of you probably already know northern pike. Present in the Yahara chain of lakes, we have a trophy pike fishery in the lakes here, meaning that it's managed to produce a few large individuals, and you can only, if you're going to bring home the pike, it's got to be a big one. It's got to be one of the biggest pikes you're ever likely to see. So we do have something special going on these lakes. But northern pike are actually a very successful species, widespread across North America. They do well in a lot of different lakes. So as we get into the reproductive strategy, keep in mind this is something that has worked really well for them in the past, and it's enabled them to spread and grow across a large swath of the earth. But they're large predators. They are solitary hunters. They are going to be found cruising the edge of weed beds, looking for fish to prey upon. The weeds would be the shelter for where the smaller fish might be trying to hide, and the predators will kind of cruise the edge of the weeds, looking for anybody who might peek outside that and make themselves vulnerable to a meal. The bottom photo there has got some of the impressive teeth on the northern pike, which you don't want to put your hand in if you're trying to pull one out of an ice hole. So the challenge for northern pike, if you reach 2, 3, 4 feet as an adult northern pike, there's very few things in the lake then that are going to try and eat you, right? So how can you best get your young to that size? Where they're if the large fish, they can reproduce year after year, and they're almost invulnerable, to predation. But pike don't start out like that. They start out like this. They're very, very small. This is a pike egg, and the eyes of the developing pike are on the bottom right. You can kind of see that it's got some yolk in there to help sustain it for the first few weeks of life. And this is obviously enlarged. This is a very, very small pike egg that really would make a great snack for many, many things in the aquatic environment. An insect. This is small enough that certain aquatic insects will try to eat it. Other small fish would love to gobble this up because it's got those yolks in there. So just like eggs that we eat, this would be extremely nutritious. Little snack for many things. So pike are very, very vulnerable at this stage of life. The pike has to get past this stage to a point where it can start growing. Every little bit you grow is going to make you less and less vulnerable to other things in the aquatic environment. Some more examples of developing pike. So these little guys on the left, there's the penny for scale, and they've already hatched out of their egg. They're starting to grow. And the pike on the right-hand side is, I'd say several months old, and this is still small, right? It fits in the palm of your hand, but already this pike has grown enough where it's no longer threatened by the same things that these little guys are. So even growing this amount is helpful for that individual's survival. This individual has a much better chance of making it to reproduction than any of these guys or the egg that we saw earlier. So Pike's strategy is going to focus on giving the youngest, most vulnerable individuals, giving them the best setup to make it to the size where they can get out in the open water, start eating fish, and start growing bigger and bigger. Okay, so how do pike do it? Well, what they're going to do is basically look for a really safe nursery for their young. And this will start when water temperatures reach about 45 in the spring. And even before that, the pike are starting to look for places to spawn. And what they're really looking for is a place that gets warm first. If you're deep in Lake Mendota, that water is going to take a long time to heat up in the spring. You really want to find somewhere warmer where the water is shallower. So the pike are going upstream a lot of the time, looking for places that look kind of like this. And what you should see in this photo is the emergent vegetation coming out of the water, and the water is very shallow. So the sunlight is going to warm that water more quickly in the spring than other places. And pike are very, very aggressive about finding a good spot like this. As an adult pike coming out of the winter, you're spending a lot of energy. You'll be sensing the water temperature, looking for warmer places, even swimming up under the ice to try and get to a place like this, maybe farther from the lake along the margins, or up into a stream and into a place where the water's spread out. And again, looking for that warmth. And the reason you want warm water is because it kind of governs how fast aquatic organisms can grow. And if you have ample food, then the temperature is really the control on the rate of growth. So if we look under the water, this gives you a better idea of what the pike are really looking for here. So again, shallow water, it can be even shallower than this, only a few inches. The top of the pike might be poking out of the water, but they're in there for their young, and so they don't mind that. And they're also looking for this stuff. So this is like vegetation that is underwater, and they're looking to stick their eggs to the vegetation like this to keep them out of the sediment. If your eggs fall down into the sediment where there's silt or something, they can get covered and get starved of oxygen that way. So that's a big concern. And the pike have evolved these eggs that stick to stuff like this to keep them in the water as opposed to on the bottom, and keep them oxygenated that way. So what happens is that the males will go up and find a site like this. The females will follow, and they will deposit their eggs on vegetation like this in several different places. And that's also part of the strategy, is literally not putting all your eggs in one basket, or in this case, patch of vegetation. And so if one of those egg clumps is discovered and eaten by something, you have insurance in some other ones spread around. So the females will go deposit eggs in many places. The males will follow and fertilize them. Groups of males usually following females. And then the pike kind of head out. They don't provide parental care beyond finding a really suitable nursery. But think about this pike to get here is maybe it's not prioritizing feeding as much. It's having to swim upstream, which they are good swimmers, but that's a little bit of expenditure of energy, and taking time to go find a good nursery. And that's kind of the strategy, is to give the young a good place to develop, maybe a little more sheltered from predators, the warm water that's going to heat up faster than the lake in the spring. And the pike will spend several months here, just again, using that yolk from the egg and then switching to feeding on small insects in the water or little, all sorts of aquatic insects, and then eventually getting to the point where they'll start feeding on fish, and moving out of the nursery and into the lake proper. And so here's an older photo of a really impressive individual. Even with the nursery strategy, most pike do not get to reach this size. It's still, there's a lot of loss of the youngest and most vulnerable. Again, they expect some of the eggs to get eaten, to get found out, some of the young to get predated upon by their fish and things, but they're generating a lot of eggs, and they're doing much better than they would if they just deposited those eggs in the lake bottom or something. But the point I want to make here is that having a few large individuals like this is really good for the population. So if you think about a pike that's 15 inches long and a pike that's 30 inches long, the pike that's twice as long isn't producing twice as many eggs. It's probably producing something like 4 to 8 times as many eggs. So with length, there's kind of an exponential growth in the number of eggs that individual can produce. And so that's something fisheries managers think about when they think about how to manage a fishery for a successful population. Is that these if you get those larger individuals, they can really help sustain the population for the next generation, just because they're so large and they can produce so many eggs or sperm, which again takes energy and investment, right, to produce those cells. So that's often so think about when you're out fishing, that's why the larger individuals are super important to the population, and that feeds into the management strategy a lot of the time. The other connection that humans have to pike reproduction is, if you remember the spawning habitat that I was showing, the nursery habitat, that's basically a wetland, an open water wetland where the water is spread out over a large area. And those are the types of habitat that unfortunately we've lost a lot of in the nation and in Wisconsin too. So protecting wetland habitat, especially that's connected to a stream or a lake like that pike could get to, is really important for sustaining pike populations into the future. So that's a big part of why wetlands are so important. And there are other species that also spawn there. But if you like pike, think about shallow water wetlands. Okay, so we'll start a little table here. So we can compare the species. And so pike will go up top. They produce tens of thousands of eggs, hundreds of thousands of eggs. Very few survive, but their strategy is to find a good nursery and give the eggs that are there the best chance of survival and again, to grow quickly. It's all about growing quickly. One of their biggest obstacles would probably be the habitat loss that's occurred in wetlands. And so, the more places like that we can preserve and restore, the better off the pike will be. And again, they've spread all across North America, so it'd be good to keep them around. But now we will move on. We've got another fan favorite, right? Really good eating. We have a great panfish fishery in the Madison chain of lakes and many lakes across Wisconsin. Bluegill are really tolerant fish. They do well in a lot of different environments. Again, we'll call them highly successful because their reproductive strategy has allowed them to spread across this continent really, really well. But you can see this is an adult bluegill on the right. So already so even adults of this species are still vulnerable to predation. They don't really get to the point where nothing can eat them except maybe the biggest bluegill. And actually, just as a side note, that's why they're compressed and laterally like that. They're trying to grow up, and they have those spines there just to make it harder to fit in a pike's mouth, basically. So growth, again, is going to be really important to just get bigger and bigger. Every time you grow a little bit bigger, there's another type of fish that can't fit you in its mouth anymore. And so that's good. Even a little bit of growth helps. But basically, I wanted to make the point that you can tell by the size of this fish and the way it's designed that it's going to have a different strategy than pike, probably. And so it's going to provide more parental care. But we'll see that not all the males want to put in the work to be good parents. Throughout this talk, you'll notice I'm restraining myself from a lot of jokes that I could make here. So I really hope you're making the jokes at home with whoever you're watching with. Feel free to do that. But let's get back to bluegill. So they're going to spawn later in the spring than pike. They're waiting for water temperatures more of around 67 degrees Fahrenheit. And what happens then when water reaches that temperature is that the males actually put in work to just make little nests like this. So these circles on the picture here are bluegill nests, or redds, R-E-D-D-S, that they're making. And they have cleared debris from this little crater area. You can see over here where there's no nests, it's kind of this more algae and kind of fine sediment stuff. So just like the pike, they don't want their eggs on the bottom of the lake bed where there's fine particles that could choke them out of oxygen. But for little fish, this is some work. So they're using their snouts and tails, creating a little crater, and have some gravel down there that they've exposed or moved in there. And so also they're doing it as a colony. There's many individuals would have made these nests, and that's part of the strategy too. If you make your nest in a colony like that, you're more, as a smaller fish, you're more vulnerable. So it helps to have more lookouts. And if there's a colony like this that gets discovered by a predator, maybe not everyone gets eaten. So basically males are doing this to try and attract females to say, look, I have the best little crater here. You should put your eggs here. So yeah, they're doing this to attract the females. The females will come, deposit the eggs, and the males stay and provide some care, usually about a week and a half. And they'll be doing things like looking out for predators. Sometimes they fan the eggs with their tails to just move water through past the eggs to give them oxygen. And during this time where the males are providing care, they're going to lose about 10% of their body weight just from energy use. So that's a lot of work, right? To clear the nest, attract the female, guard the eggs. You're probably not eating during that time. So what if you could get away with passing your genes on to the next generation without providing any parental care? That would be good for that individual. So what scientists have found is that there's other strategies, competing strategies from bluegill males that go on at the same time. So the largest individual here is the parental male. This individual is trying to attract the females again to the nest, get them to deposit the eggs, fertilize them with his sperm, and then guard them. But we also have I'll point out the female here, right? So the female is going to be the one that would deposit the eggs. We also have another male down here called a sneaker male. And this is kind of like a subtype of bluegill male that has a totally different strategy. And just like the name, what it's going to do is sneak up to the nest and try to fertilize those eggs, or some of them, before the parental male does. So they'll release sperm, and the sperm will compete to try and fertilize the eggs. And then it will go away and not spend any time or effort in raising the brood, and hope that the parental male will do it for them. So if you're successful, the larger fish is kind of looking out for little guys like this, and they will bully them if they notice it. But if you can do this, if you can fertilize some of the eggs and then take off, you have just passed on your genes to the next generation, and you have expended very little effort. And also, this individual is likely a lot younger. So you got to do it at a younger age than this male, which had to grow, to this size to provide the nest and attract the female and all that. So interestingly, this sneaker type of male often grows into a female mimic. So this individual is another male that has kind of mimicked the patterning of a female bluegill. And the strategy kind of remains the same. Well, they'll try to use their lookalike status to get close to the nest again, and again, fertilize the eggs and take off, and have their genes passed on that way. Interestingly, there's some evidence that the parental males here can using chemical cues in the water, kind of detect how many of the brood they're raising are their own. And yeah, that's like a chemical signal from the individuals that they can sense, and kind of have an idea of how many of the brood are theirs and how many maybe were eggs fertilized by a sneaker male or a female mimic, and they adjust their effort accordingly. So if only 10% of the fry you're guarding are your own, it makes sense. It's kind of cruel, but it makes sense to put in a lot less effort into that brood, move on, and try to raise another brood either in the same season or next year. So it's kind of a way, so you can see the competition happening there between these two like subtypes of the same species. So this is less scientific. This is kind of just my personal theory, but if you were to go pan fishing, you might be throwing back the males that are the smaller size, right? You want to keep the ones to eat, that'll go in your pan, and those are probably the larger parental males or larger females. So it's possible that, you know, as anglers, we might be taking out some of the parental males and leaving in the other types. But if you do that, you need some parental males in the population to sustain it. So eventually there'll be, you know, kind of pressure for that strategy to become more popular. So we'll add bluegill to our little chart here. They produce fewer eggs in general than pike, but the fry are going to have a little bit better survival rate, I think, because of that parental care provided by the male bluegill for that first week or so of life. And then beyond that, there is a lot of mortality, but that's their strategy, is to provide a little bit more care. And you can be a good dad or a sneaky one to try and, you know, take advantage of kind of the hard work of others. And those two strategies are in kind of constant competition for bluegill. I'll also point out that that picture I showed earlier of where the nests are, that's another nearshore area that might be vulnerable to habitat loss for some of the things humans tend to do to lakes. You know, if you had boat traffic in that area, that could be disruptive. If you had a runoff event with rain falling on the landscape, collecting pollutants, and if there's a driveway that goes right down to the lake for a boat launch, the rain can wash things off the landscape. And if you got a bunch of pollutants or silt that washed to those nests, that would probably have a detrimental effect too. So just want to point out that, you know, the habitat, we think about habitat a lot and what we do to it as humans, but it's kind of like an especially vulnerable habitat when all that reproduction is happening there for pike or for bluegill. So if we can focus on those critical habitat areas, I think we can have a lot of success at keeping these fish around for future generations. All right, now we'll move away from friendly fish and talk about something slimier. So leeches, I'll kind of be talking about leeches in general. There are about 24 species in Wisconsin. A lot of them are aquatic. They're fully aquatic. They'll spend their entire life cycle in the water, but some go back and forth between land. So, you know, on the left side is a diagram of a leech. It's really not the most complicated organism. You know, it sucks blood. It has particular types of saliva to keep blood from clotting. It digests it inside there, and that's pretty much it. But also, I just wanted I couldn't help, I wanted to include this picture of a probable leech fossil from right here in Wisconsin. This is a great kind of assemblage of fossils that's over there in Waukesha, and it's from about 435 million years ago. So if you want to call humans a successful species, maybe check back in 400 million years and see if we're still here. And again, just to point out that whatever leeches have been doing, they've been doing it for a long time, and it's been fairly successful. So despite the fact that leeches some species will try to suck your blood, I'll point out that actually there's very little risk of disease transmission from leeches. So if you do find one on you after, you know, going swimming or anything, you can just pull them off by hand. And there's, unlike mosquitoes, you know, for example, there's very little risk of them, you know, passing any bacteria onto you or viruses or anything. And if you're an angler, you know that leeches are an important part of the aquatic food chain, great fish food. You can often, you use them as bait for certain types of fish, but there's a lot of leeches, and that provides a great base of food for fish. There's one study in 1918 that estimated that there are about 100 million leeches in Lake Mendota. So there's something to think about. All right, so leech reproduction, the thing that everybody really came here for today. The really interesting thing about leeches is that they are hermaphroditic. So they have both male and female reproductive organs, which they can both use. So this is this little graphic here, but there's the leech, male and female reproductive organs, basically just pores, on the underside of the leech. And here's their two suckers here where they can attach to things. But we haven't seen this strategy yet in any of the species so far. So how it works in leeches is that depending on the time of year for the species, it's usually spring or summer. They're going to start out they'll start out producing sperm as males, and they will basically stick each other with little packets of sperm that stick in the skin. And the packets can kind of hang out there for a minute. So they're starting out all male, kind of inseminating each other, and then they switch over to being female. And they take in any sperm they have, fertilize their own eggs with it, and the eggs will develop and eventually kind of cluster together into a cocoon, and several cocoons will be produced by an individual. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about that, but in the meantime, see if you can think of why this hermaphroditic strategy, where you can be male and then female, and then actually switch back to being male for the next breeding season, why that might be advantageous to leeches, and why they've stuck with that strategy for hundreds of millions of years. Okay, so a little more detail just about how this different leech species. So on the left, you've got a leech swimming kind of belly side up here, and these are the cocoons I was talking about, and they've each got several eggs in there. So this individual is carrying several dozen of its young, which has been fertilized with the sperm of another leech, and then the eggs have been produced, and they're hanging out there. So some species will just deposit the cocoons in the sediment and call it a day. But actually, there's a particular species called Helabdella striata, which does the stuff here on the right side. And this actually is a leech that provides parental care. So these aren't little cocoons here. These are individual leeches that have hatched from their eggs and are still hanging out on the underside of the parent. And you might be able to tell what's going on here. The parent is actually capturing an aquatic worm and holding it and letting the young suck its blood to get basically their first meal. And then unfortunately the worm has died, and the blood is now in the young leeches. So this is a lot of effort, right? As opposed to just dropping the cocoons off and taking off. You're now swimming around with your young there. You're probably slower, maybe making yourself more vulnerable to predation that way. Plus you've got to expend the energy to capture the worm and feed it to the young, because they can't do it themselves yet. So this is kind of coming back to that theme of trade-offs, right? So if you're going to invest this energy into the young, the parent is kind of losing out, right? They've got to expend energy. They're making themselves vulnerable. But it turns out the young of this species who get the parental care, again, grow more quickly and are at a heavier weight at the same age than young leeches of a different species. So you can choose to invest more parental care, and your young probably have a better chance of survival. And if you evolve that strategy, has different consequences than if you just go for the strategy of kind of letting the young go and producing more of them that way, maybe. And again, it's all about growing bigger in the aquatic environment. So these individuals, who have already gotten a meal, probably going to do better, higher survival for these individuals than maybe the ones that are just dropped off on the bottom of the lake. Okay, so let's get back to the question about hermaphroditism, right? So we've got two populations. On the left side is or I won't say typical, but a species, like humans, where the males and females are separate. And on the right-hand side is a species like leeches, where the individuals can be both male and female. So the advantages of being hermaphroditic kind of come down to simple math. So let's say you're trying to find a partner in the lake. If the sexes are separated like this, you actually only have about half the number of potential partners. So you have to look, if you're in this situation, than if you're a leech. If you're a leech, any other leech could be a potential partner, and so you don't have to search as hard. So that's one way that the strategy could help. The other way, which you might have already guessed, is that if females can carry the next generation, then if only half the population is females, then half of the population can contribute to the next generation. Whereas for leeches, each individual leech could be carrying several dozen young for the next generation. And so you've kind of got this numbers advantage with the strategy that leeches have, and you're still getting the advantages of sexual reproduction. And the theory of why sexual reproduction evolved is that you're basically mixing genetic information from two individuals to make a new, unique genetic individual. So the genes that any young has in the next generation is kind of going to be scrambled and randomized from the two parents. And that's really good. You want to have a lot of genetic variation in your population. You want to recombine genes from different individuals and try different things out. And so you're still getting that advantage with the hermaphroditic strategy, but you also kind of get this numbers advantage here that we just talked about. And that'll do it for leeches. So they're not producing a ton of eggs and sperm like the fish we talked about, but each individual is carrying dozens of young if they were successful at finding a partner. And so different species provide different amounts of care. I would have loved to go into to try and find out more about how those different parental strategies evolved in leeches. But for now, we'll just say that the leech that provides more parental care, it evolved that strategy because of some difference in the environment between that leech and other species that evolved. So there must have been a time when that was really advantageous to provide more parental care. And they also have the advantages of their hermaphroditism. I put not much here for obstacles to success. I'm not an expert, so there could be some species of leech in Wisconsin that are not doing well or doing better than others. But in general, leeches are all over. They are pretty tolerant of the things that humans tend to do to aquatic ecosystems. So nutrient enrichment, nutrient pollution, and things like adding more silt to the lakes and stuff, that the leeches do okay in kind of mucky bottomed lakes and stuff, and with more nutrients. So they're doing okay. All right, final species for today is zebra mussel. So unfortunately, the zebra mussels are really successful. They've spread across North America, through the Great Lakes. We've had kind of moderate success at slowing their spread. Very much still an active area of research as the best ways to deal with these guys and really what consequences they can have for aquatic ecosystems. Really briefly, I'll just mention, so the reason why there's so much concern over zebra mussels is that they will absolutely, if there's suitable hard substrate, they will cover the bottom of the lake, and they're filter feeders. So they're filtering things out of the water column and then excreting nutrients on the bottom of the lake. So they're kind of en masse moving things that are in the water column to the bottom of the lake. And that has big consequences for the ecosystem as a whole, for like where the nutrients are. The water clarity changes, that changes how the sunlight comes in, that changes where plants can grow, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see how there's lots of mechanisms at work there. So it's not the same for every lake that they get into, which is why, it's important to keep kind of researching this kind of thing. So besides that, they also just take up space. And this is a device for measuring current that was in the Great Lakes. And clearly the accuracy of this device has been declining for some time as more and more zebra mussels attach to the surface. Here's this is what they look like. Kind of very, very small, definitely, visible to the naked eye, but, smaller than your fingernail a lot of the time. And just to emphasize, they will attach to almost anything. This is a dragonfly nymph with 2 zebra mussels growing on it. And this dragonfly nymph is probably suffering from that to some degree, and more likely to get eaten that way, I think. Another big problem is that they can absolutely suffocate native clams, or a native Great Lakes mussel here, just covering it. And this poor thing could be starved of nutrients, or maybe not able to get oxygen, because just the bulk of zebra mussels covering it. So that's kind of why we're so concerned about them all the time. And again, the response is going to vary from lake to lake. So while we do have zebra mussels in the Yahara chain of lakes, it's, we haven't seen it, obviously haven't seen a total collapse of the ecosystem or anything. So we're keeping an eye on that. A lot of people are doing good work to research that and also prevent the spread. Okay, so reproduction. The way zebra mussels get it going is that they're basically just release a lot of sperm and eggs into the water column when they are mature, and just let it go. And then the sperm and eggs meet up in the water and form kind of a larval stage called the veliger. And this early stage of zebra mussels is really important because adults, once they're settled down, they don't move. So this is really the only way this species can relocate, is by creating these veligers who are free floating, and they will go with the currents, but they can also kind of, at some point they will settle and choose a place to set up shop permanently. And this is why it's so hard to control their spread. These things are very, very small. You can easily accidentally bring them from one water body to another. They can survive, they can, survive in a tiny little pocket of water on your boot or something, or in a live well. So it's part of their strategy is to have this really mobile larval form that can kind of spread, and obviously it'll go downstream, go into other water bodies. If there's a flood, it could go, spread that way. So this part of the strategy is to have this really mobile larval form to go and seek out new territory. But there's a little bit more going on. So let's think about trade-offs again. So if you're a zebra mussel, you've got some good food here, you're filtering out algae. And if the algae is really good, energy dense, it's the right species of algae for you, you can put energy into both growth and reproduction. So growth here would be including maintaining the current body size you have and growing. And that's good for zebra mussels to do because as a larger individual, next year you can produce more sperm or eggs. And also, the larger the zebra mussel is, the better it does in low oxygen conditions. And that will happen a lot on the bottom of lakes. So the larger you are, you're better able to weather a period of low oxygen. But you also want to put some effort into reproduction for the next generation. And zebra mussels, again, can lose up to half their body weight just in a single season, releasing sperm and eggs into the water. So it's a big investment in reproduction. But obviously, if you don't do that, then you have no chance of contributing your genes to the next generation. So when food is good, zebra mussels can do a little bit of both. But what if the food quality declines? So we've got these darker green algae, which might represent a different species that has a different chemical makeup. It's not as nutritious. Maybe it's hard to digest, something like that. And we know that the types of algae in a lake or phytoplankton can change really rapidly in a matter of weeks. So this happens often. Food quality declines. And here, the zebra mussel does something kind of noble. What it does is it basically sacrifices its own growth and its own chance of survival for increased reproduction. And the evolutionary logic here is that, well, if conditions are poor, this individual might not make it anyway, but they could at least contribute to make some villagers, which might be able to find better habitat in the future. So it's kind of a sacrifice that's made, right? So without growth, you can't produce as much for the next round of reproduction, and you're much more likely to perish before that happens. But it's kind of like a last effort to just, well, maybe the next generation will find a better place to live. And that's part of the strategy too, is this trade-off, that organisms can make. And it's not like they have brains like us, but they can take in cues from the environment and have this kind of decision made about where to invest energy. So I'll just mention, there's all sorts of great effort here in Wisconsin to try and keep invasive species in certain lakes, or keep them in the lakes where they already are, and not spread them. Removing invasive species entirely is really difficult. Our best bet is to try and slow the spread. And that's what these folks are doing. They're pulling the plants off their trailer. It's actually illegal to drive on the highway with plants on your boat or trailer. So make sure you're removing all that. And then the other thing is to drain all the water from your live well or anything, and really try and check out, Clean Lakes Alliance has great information on this. Other lakes organizations, DNR, just make sure you're taking the right precautions, especially if you're moving your boat and trailer from one lake to another, or your waders or anything like that. Really good to decontaminate or dry them out completely for several days. All right, so zebra mussels, kind of a different approach here. They're very low survival originally because they're releasing so much eggs and sperm. Again, those villager stages are probably tasty snacks that get eaten up in the water, but they have this ability to sacrifice for their offspring, and to try and increase the number that survive in the next generation. And that larval stage, the villager, is really important. That's how they give themselves a chance to get to new environments. Their obstacles to success are responsible boaters. Again, we'll have to see kind of what the next stage holds, as far as research going on with zebra mussel spread, and what we're going to be most concerned about as if they move to different lakes. And that'll be it. I think we'll get to some questions. Thanks everybody for listening. This talk is always really, really fun to give. And yeah, I'll finish with a little sunset on Lake Mendota there.
Oh, isn't that pretty? Well, thanks so much, Justin, for all your knowledge on all the different reproductive systems. It's super interesting. And again, appropriate as we're approaching Valentine's Day. Now, Justin, I want you to stay on your toes, because after these questions I have from folks that are watching right now, I want to see if you have a joke for us. I don't know if we were able to fill in the blanks ourselves. So we'll come back to that, but on to the real questions now. First from Kitty, asking about McDaniels Park near Lake Wabisa in McFarland. Planning on spraying grapeseed oil on grasses along the shore to discourage Canada geese. Apparently, they'll have to do it every week or week and a half once it's mowed. During the warm months. So Kitty asking, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but would that runoff affect the fish from those grape seeds?
I don't know. I think that's a really interesting idea that they're trying. The idea there is to discourage geese so that the nutrients from their waste doesn't get into the lake. So that's the idea behind that strategy. I don't know about that particular oil. I would, assume that is being taken into account, that would not harm the fish. If it's a natural oil, that's probably, better than a chemical, residue or any. And the real question is it, as long as it's better than the goose waste getting into the lake, then it's a net advantage. But that's interesting. I did not know that.
Well, we're all learning stuff today, Justin.
Yeah.
So next question is from Chuck, asking how many eggs do pike lay, and is their reproduction an annual event every spring?
Yes, it is. Yeah, so it's an annual event, and pike can begin reproducing when they're I think like 2 years old. So yeah, a pike is relatively long lived for some of these aquatic organisms, can do it many, many years. And yeah, the number of eggs is, I know it's in the thousands, and I didn't get more specific than that because it really depends on the size of the individual. And like it's that like exponential growth, right? So the youngest pike are maybe in the 1,000 range, but then as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it'll get up to 100,000 eggs. And then the sperm production, the same thing. The males can produce more and more and more the bigger they get. So it really is dependent on the size. But yeah, that's a yearly event.
All righty, on to leeches. Is there anything humans are doing that perpetuate their survival or breeding? And Matt also throwing in that he really loved the presentation. He's an avid angler himself.
Nice, great. So are humans doing anything to aid leeches? Is that the question? Like in their...
Yeah, to perpetuate their survival or breeding, or kind of helping or hurting, I guess. We'll do both sides of the coin.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think, like I've said, in general, there are different species of leeches. So I think in general, they are more tolerant to pollution. So as far as human effects on waterways, there's usually another species that we get concerned about first before we're worried about leeches. So a lot of other aquatic insects and invertebrates are a lot more sensitive. And often those are kind of the species we look to first to see if the health of a waterway is declining. Maybe folks have heard of a biotic index, or where you go and look at all the different invertebrates in a stream, and from the species that are there, you can tell how much nutrient pollution is in the waterway. And leeches are not great for that because they're almost always there. They can tolerate low oxygen, they can tolerate some pollution. And again, this might vary species to species, but a lot of the time they're doing okay. And I'm not aware of any invasive, actually, I know there are invasive leeches, but I don't know that they're in Wisconsin. And I think we aren't, I haven't found anything to suggest that that's really a problem, that we're spreading leeches. I think, again, we have other species that are more invasive and more problematic that we become concerned about first.
Interesting. Jane asking, what controls zebra mussels in their original habitats?
That's a great question that I wish I had the answer to. So I might look that one up and get back to Jane or send that along. But they are from the kind of like the Baltic area is the idea. And there could be any number of things that keep them at bay there. I know somewhat related here is that a big constraint is the calcium in the water. They need calcium to make their shells. And so that's how we kind of prioritize which lakes are most vulnerable, is the calcium levels there, and then also the amount of hard substrate. And so Lake Mendota actually does not have as much, that rocky substrate as the Great Lakes. And so that's maybe one of the reasons why we are hopeful that the impacts on our lakes here will be somewhat minimized. But now that question has got me curious. So I am going to look that up. What controls zebra mussels in their native habitat?
Yeah, one of our moderators also having a question similar to that as well. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of interest there. So is it safe to assume, though, that in the Great Lakes, that's really where we're seeing the zebra mussel impact?
Yeah, and that's also just because they've been there the longest. So they've had plenty of time to spread. And we also have the quagga mussel in there too. So it's kind of a double whammy for the Great Lakes. And then they're kind of moving outward there and, jumping from water body to water body with the aid of humans. So yeah, the Great Lakes is kind of the classic case study. But obviously, the Great Lakes are huge. They're really deep. and they're basically like small oceans. And so the effects there could be radically different from what you would say have if zebra mussels got into a 250-acre lake in northern Wisconsin. You know, it's really a lake-specific response. You know, so we really need to not only study the Great Lakes, but also other lakes too.
Okay. Back to leeches. Chuck asking, do they need other leeches to fertilize their own eggs, or do they fertilize them themselves?
Yeah, so again, that you want, I think some leeches can reproduce asexually, so just using their own sperm, but you really want to, if you can, get sperm from another leech to, again, recombine that genetic information. Because if you have individuals that are all genetically identical, then they're all equally susceptible to a parasite or something, or disease. And so that there really is an advantage, evolutionary advantage, that pushes species to have some sexual reproduction. And so in most cases, the leeches, if they can, they're going to go and find another individual to mate with.
All right. Well, looking ahead, Paul asks our last question here, our last real question, if you will. Any predictions into the rest of this year or next year into what species will do particularly well and why?
Predictions for a species that would do well this year. I don't know. Well, you know, one of the things that we'll be keeping an eye on is that the early spring temperatures for pike, you know, that they're really dependent on a few weeks of the year there. So, you know, weather during those, that year where, conditions during that time when the young are in the shallow wetlands are really important. So if water levels were to drop at that time, that could be really bad. Or you know, you might have a really good year with a boom of pike, and that really varies year to year. A lot of fish species kind of have this not a few years of not so successful year class, and then I'll have one year that's really good, you know. Paul asking for predictions. I guess I'm the groundhog now for the aquatic species.
Sure, exactly. I know. Just figure out everything for us. What, you know, pinpoint all of the things into this next year. Well, I think that'll wrap it up. Again, I know, you know, you're kind of making a dad joke at some point earlier in the presentation. But again, I just want to appreciate you for joining us this morning, and everyone watching us here as well, about all the reproduction techniques that our fish and plants undertake in our lakes. And if you didn't get your question answered, which we did get to them all, but you can, of course, email any additional questions to info@cleanlakesalliance.org. And Clean Lakes Alliance will work to get you that answer with Justin. And Justin, of course, has a little homework to look up about the, what was it, about the pike, I believe?
For the native mussels in their native environment.
Yeah, the native mussels.
Yeah.
Right, that'll be interesting to hear about. So we'll have a follow-up from you and an email sent out to our participants about that once that's answered. Next Science Cafe, Clean Lake Science Cafe 101 is happening March 9th, that Wednesday. And we'll be talking about microbes that live under the ice. We'll still, of course, have ice in early March. And once again, the Clean Lakes Alliance and WKOW are sponsoring the event this weekend with Clean Lakes Alliance, as their event is underway. Frozen Assets at the on Lake Mendota, right in front of the Edgewater. Go ahead, sign up for the Frozen 5K Run Walk. There's still room for you to sign up, and that happens Saturday morning. And some folks from WKOW will be on site enjoying the day as well. So thanks so much again for joining us. Again, I'm meteorologist Max Separis. We'll see you again on Wednesday, March 9th at 8 in the morning for our next Clean Lakes 101 Science Cafe about microbes under the ice. We'll talk then.